ARMs and CDOs and credit derivatives. Oh my! Hey everybody. So this is my review of The Big Short. It's directed by Adam McKay, who's best known for doing the Anchorman movies 1 and 2, The Other Guys, Step Brothers, Talladega Nights. He was a head writer on SNL, and so worked a lot with Will Ferrell and those kind of people. He's actually a writing partner with Will Ferrell, and they started the Funny or Die along with their Gary Sanchez production company. It's written by Adam McKay and Charles Randolph. I didn't know much of anything about Randolph until I was looking at his stuff. He wrote the screenplay for Love and Other Drugs. He hasn't had too much of a body of work, but he's more of a dramatic writer. And it's starring Christian Bale, Steve Carell, Ryan Gosling, and Brad Pitt. Now this movie is a little complicated, and I love that. During the 2008 crash, in 2008, when the housing market crashed, I was really interested in finding out what happened, because I like stocks and markets, I like movements, I like numbers, and so I started researching it to try and find out what happened. And so I found this whole subject matter totally interesting. I knew a lot of this stuff going into the movie, and I wanted to explain a couple of terms, couple of things before we get to the movie, just so that I don't have to explain them while I'm trying to explain the story. So you have what are called ARMs, or adjustable rate mortgages. And what an ARM does is you get your loan for very cheap, because you're basically just paying the interest. But it will balloon, and depending on the amount of years that you have, whether it be 5, 10, 15-year ARMs, after those 5 years, then the monthly payments can increase like 200-300%, because you have to pay on the principal, and you're not paying all of the interest, and so it compounds. So the only reason to get an ARM, or an adjustable rate mortgage, is if you are planning on refinancing or moving before that 5 years. The problem that we were having back then, though, is people would get stuck in the ARMs, and they would go what's called underwater, where they ended up owing more money than the property was worth, or the amount of their mortgage was higher than the value of the house, and you can't refinance at that point, because you have to have a certain amount of equity before you can refinance. So people would get stuck in these ARM mortgages. Then you have what's called a CDO, or a collateralized debt obligation. And what that is it's a package. It's a package where they put in all of these mortgages, all of these loans into one big package, and then sell it for a lot of money. And it's mixed with a bunch of different types of mortgages, and they all have ratings. AAA is the best, AA, A, B, double B, and triple B. Triple B is the absolute worst. So they would mix some of these B's to triple B's in with these A's, and the A's would prop it up and make the entire bulk worth more. And they would sell those out, which is fine. But they were making so many of them that the loan officers needed more loans to put in there. So they would give out these ARM loans to just about anybody. Didn't matter what their credit was, or if they had any money down, if they even had a job. I don't even think you could still get one of these mortgages. And so these huge CDOs ended up being full of just crap loans, and no one knew it, or no one really thought about it. Then you had what the movie is talking about. The movie talks about these people that noticed that all of these CDOs are crap, and they're full of these loans that are delinquent and eventually going to fail, and they wanted to bet against the market. But there wasn't anything set up to bet against the market, or what they call shorting. Shorting is where you bet on a stock to go down or something to go down. And so they created a credit default swap. And a credit default swap basically says, I will pay you this amount of money, but if this mortgage fails or this CDO fails, then you owe me like 25 up to 200 times that I paid you. And the banks loved it because they thought the housing market would never fail, because it never has. And so they were willing to give these out willy-nilly. The problem they had was they ended up putting those together into another group called a credit derivative, and then selling those inside these CDOs, and then reselling them and make them bigger and all over the place. And then you get into synthetic CDOs, which you really should watch the movie for that explanation. They do it a lot better. And the market crashed. One of the main reasons it crashed was the credit agencies that were giving out these AAA ratings, AA ratings. They were getting paid by the companies or in these banks to get these ratings. And so they were afraid to not give something a AAA rating, because then they would just take it to the next rating agency and pay them to do it. So the credit agencies that were supposed to be regulating the market weren't doing that because they were afraid of losing business, so they were just giving out AAA ratings when there wasn't supposed to be one. And it's a huge mess. But this movie did such a good job of explaining everything that my brother puts it this way. He's a writer. He says, it's really difficult to take a complicated idea or difficult thing to explain and make it palatable or digestible. It's even harder to make that entertaining. And this movie pulled that off. It not only made all of this information digestible and understandable, but made it entertaining at the same time. So our movie opens up with the narrator, who's Ryan Gosling. He plays Jared Vennett. Now I want to say all of the names in this movie were changed from the real people. Although they're based on real people, their names were changed because they took artistic license in some of the characters and maybe a couple of the situations, and they even mention that point blank in the movie. But the only character they didn't change the name of was Christian Bale's character, Dr. Michael Burry. But anyway, so Jared Vennett's character, or Jared Vennett, the character played by Ryan Gosling, he has very distracting looking hair at first. It was very weird because it was kind of very tight curls, and it just didn't fit him very well at first glance. After a while I forgot about it, didn't really think about it, but when I first saw him I was like, oh, what's with his hair? It's just a weird wig that they put him in. And I'm assuming it's because that's what the real guy looks like. They don't mention it or talk about it. But I forgot about it as the movie went on. And he does a good job in the beginning setting up what the tone of that era of the mid-2000s was like. The living in excess, the hedge fund managers, the banks living it up with all of this money and kind of carefree about it. And then later on, his character works with Stephen Carell's character, Mark Baum, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So Christian Bale plays Dr. Michael Burry, M.D. He's a doctor of neuroscience. He was, in real life too, he was actually a doctor of neurology and was in his residency to become a neurosurgeon, and he got bored. That's how smart the guy is. He got bored that you do the same things over and over again. And so he quit and wanted to do something that would require more attention. And ended up starting a hedge fund company called Zion Capital LLC. He was the first to discover that these CDOs had all of these loans in there that didn't have the correct rating. They were giving them bad ratings when there were a lot of delinquencies, people that were 90 days late paying their payments or going into foreclosure. And so he was seeing all of these arms in these CDOs that were failing, and he was predicting 2 years ahead of time that the housing market would crash. And so he wanted to bet against the housing market, purely on a logical market standpoint. But no one believed him. And he ended up talking his investors into investing the money for him to buy these credit default swaps, which he had to convince the banks to do. They had to create it for him because there was nothing set up for betting against a loan, for a loan to fail. That's why they created the credit default swap. Well, he bought $1.3 billion worth of credit default swaps from all of these different banks. So one of those banks that he bought it from, these credit default swaps, was Deutsche Bank. And that's the bank where Jared Vennett worked. He was talking to the guy that sold Burry these credit default swaps and wanted to know what the heck was going on with this guy that's buying up these credit default swaps all over town. And he's looking into his research and believes it. He's like, oh wow, this guy's onto something. The housing market might actually crash. But he didn't have the capital. And so he was going out trying to find investors and other fund managers to come with him to buy some more credit default swaps and get in on this thing at the ground floor. And one of the guys that he works with is Mark Baum, who is Stephen Carell's character and his team. So a lot of the movie is Stephen Carell's team, Mark Baum. They go and research these loans. They go and talk to go and see the neighborhoods, interview realtors, interview mortgage lenders, and just trying to get a feel of what's going on. And they're blown away by how corrupt the system is. And they're like, oh my gosh, like, this is happening, this is real. And so they end up buying a bunch of credit default swaps also. And everybody in the market thinks they're crazy because they have to pay out a premium every month until something happens. So they're bleeding money, just hoping that the market fails where they make the money. And another group that's separate from them is where Brad Pitt comes in. So Brad Pitt works with these two aspiring traders. They've done a lot of short trades. I won't get into that specifics, but they explain it in the movie very well. Charlie Geller, who's played by John Margaro, and Jamie Shipley, played by Finn Wittrock. And they inadvertently come across Michael Berry's research. And they're looking at it and they're like, whoa, wait a minute, this makes a lot of sense. And so they want to buy up some credit default swaps as well, but they're very small traders. They need to get a seat at the table. And their way of getting to the table is through Brad Pitt's character. Brad Pitt plays Ben Rickert, who used to be a big name trader and then quit to do his own thing. And in the movie, he was the neighbor of these two guys when they lived in Boulder, Colorado, which I live right next to Boulder, Colorado. I don't think the real guys did. I think they lived somewhere around here, but not actually in Boulder. But anyway, I just like that touch because that's where I am. So I always like seeing where I am in a movie. I think everybody does. So Adam McKay did an amazing job with this movie. Even having Vennett break the fourth wall and talk straight to the audience to explain things that you just couldn't do in the story. And one of the humorous ways of explaining things is they had celebrities. So for one of them, they had Margot Robbie in a bubble bath drinking champagne explaining CDOs. And and then they had like Selena Gomez at a blackjack table explaining synthetic CDOs. They even had Anthony Bourdain explain one while he was cooking halibut. I mean, it was great seeing all of the different ways that he utilized how to explain to the audience and allow us to be able to digest it but make it entertaining at the same time. And there were times where he was just blatant about it. He's like, look, this is hard to understand, so here's Margot Robbie in a bubble bath with champagne explaining it. I mean, that's genius. That was pure genius. And I saw an interview with him where he was talking about that with his background with SNL. Sometimes they would just say, you know, we need to explain this, so they just did it. And this movie was a lot funnier than I was expecting. I went in there expecting a drama about the crash and everything that happened in the background and how the bank screwed us over. But Adam McKay really made it an entertaining movie. I left there knowing what happened and laughing at the movie, not about the situation. The situation was horrible, but a lot of things in the movie that made me laugh. So I highly suggest going to see it. Christian Bale and Steve Carell were amazing in this movie. Their acting was way above what I was expecting. They did a great job with their characters. So go see the movie and let me know what you think. Comment below, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, and I will see you guys on the next video.